Spring arrived with cherry blossoms and new beginnings. The community center's garden, where Alex and the kids had planted flowers months ago, burst into bloom. It was here, among the colors they had created together, that he asked Dr. Rose to marry him. The proposal wasn't grand or flashy like his previous engagement. Instead, it happened during their regular Saturday volunteer session. The kids were in on the secret, helping him arrange a small treasure hunt through the garden, each clue representing a moment in their journey together. The final clue led her to a simple bench where they'd first shared lunch nearly a year ago. The ring wasn't as expensive as the one he'd given Lynn, but it held something more valuable, the promise of unconditional love. "Will you build this family with me?" he asked, his voice shaking slightly. "Not because of what we can or can't give each other, but because of who we are together." Her yes was interrupted by excited squeals as the kids burst from their hiding spots, rushing to embrace them both. The other volunteers and children from the center appeared too, carrying homemade signs and flowers. This was family, messy, unexpected, and absolutely perfect. Planning the wedding brought its own challenges. His mother, still adjusting to this new reality, suggested several traditional Chinese wedding customs. To everyone's surprise, Dr. Rose embraced them, while adding her own family's traditions to the mix. The ceremony itself was a beautiful blend of cultures and choices. The kids played central roles, the boy proudly carrying the rings, the girl scattering flower petals mixed with cherry blossoms. The community center's children formed a choir, singing a song they'd practiced for weeks. Alex's father, in a moment that brought tears to many eyes, stood to give a speech. "I used to think family was about continuing a bloodline," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "My son taught me it's about continuing love. Today, we're not losing a son to marriage, we're gaining an entire community as family." Even his mother found her way to acceptance. The morning of the wedding, she arrived early at Dr. Rose's apartment, carrying a family recipe book. "These aren't just recipes," she told her soon-to-be daughter-in-law. "They're memories, stories, love passed down through generations. Now they're yours to share with my grandchildren." The reception was held in the community center's garden, transformed by twinkling lights and paper lanterns. Children ran between tables, professionals mingled with volunteers, and multiple languages filled the air with laughter and joy. During their first dance, Alex held his wife close, overwhelmed by how full his heart felt. Their children joined them on the dance floor, turning the elegant waltz into a joyful group hug. Looking around, he saw his past and present coming together, his parents dancing with their grandchildren, his business partners chatting with community center volunteers, his two worlds finally merging into one. Later that night, as the celebrations wound down, Alex found a quiet moment with his new family. They sat on their favorite bench in the garden, watching the stars appear above the city lights. The kids were tired but happy, leaning against their parents, talking about their favorite moments of the day. "Dad," the boy asked sleepily, "can we have pancakes tomorrow? The ones with funny faces?" "Of course," Alex replied, his heart swelling at the simple question that held so much meaning. "We can have pancakes every Sunday." His wife squeezed his hand, and in that simple gesture was everything he ever needed to know about family and love. It wasn't about perfect genes or family trees. It was about perfect moments like this. A quiet evening, sleepy children, and hearts so full they could burst. A shooting star streaked across the sky, and they all made wishes. Alex didn't need to wish for anything. He had everything he never knew he needed. His infertility, once a source of shame, had led him to this moment, to this family, to this love. As they walked to their car, the kids already half asleep, Alex looked back at the community center. Its worn brick walls and bright murals had become the foundation of his new life. Sometimes, he realized, the best things in life come from the deepest wounds. And sometimes, family isn't born, it's built, one love story at a time. News travels fast in tight-knit communities. Alex's mother heard about his relationship with Dr. Rose through family friends who'd seen them together at the Science Museum. The phone call came on a Sunday morning, interrupting their pancake breakfast with the kids. "We heard you're seeing someone," his mother said, her voice carrying that familiar mix of hope and judgment. "A doctor, they say. When were you planning to tell us?" Alex watched Dr. Rose helping her daughter decorate pancakes with fruit faces while her son attempted to create the perfect syrup-to-pancake ratio. This was his family now, messy, imperfect, and absolutely perfect. "Yes, I am," he replied, his voice steady, "and she has 2 wonderful children." The silence on the other end was deafening. "Then bring her to dinner next weekend. Your father and we've been thinking. Maybe we were too harsh. You're still our son." Alex knew what this meant. They'd heard he was dating a successful doctor, and suddenly he was worth acknowledging again. The old him would have jumped at this chance for reconciliation, but the man he'd become knew better. "Before I answer," he said, "I should tell you she's black and her children are adopted." Another long silence. "Well," his mother finally said, her voice strained but trying to sound progressive, "times are changing. As long as she's educated and from a good family." "Mom," Alex interrupted, "I'm not asking for permission or approval. I'm telling you about the woman I love and the family I've chosen. If you want to be part of my life, you need to accept all of us." The dinner was set for the following Saturday. Dr. Rose squeezed his hand as they walked up to his childhood home, the kids dressed in their best clothes. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "we've got you." His mother opened the door, her practiced smile faltering slightly as she took in the complete picture of her son's new family. The kids, sensing the tension, moved closer to Dr. Rose. The dinner started awkwardly. His mother's questions came with subtle digs about real family and tradition. His father barely spoke, watching everything with unreadable eyes. Then came the moment that changed everything. "So," his mother said, setting down her chopsticks, "I assume you're planning to have your own children as well?" "There are treatments." Before Alex could respond, Dr. Rose straightened in her chair. Her voice was calm but carried steel beneath the softness. "Let me be clear," she said. "Your son is an extraordinary man who has shown more strength and character in his pain than most show in their victories. He's teaching my children about resilience, about choosing love over bitterness, about building bridges instead of walls." She continued, her eyes meeting each of his parents in turn. "These children call him Dad, not because of DNA, but because he's earned that title with every bedtime story, every homework help session, every moment of unconditional love. If you can't see how remarkable your son is beyond his ability to have biological children, then you're missing out on knowing a truly exceptional human being." The silence that followed was broken by the young boy. "Dad," he said, reaching for Alex's hand, "can you tell them about how you helped me win the science fair? About the robot we built together?" Something in his father's face changed at the word Dad. He looked at his son, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time since the diagnosis. He saw the love in the children's eyes, the protective way Dr. Rose held Alex's other hand, the quiet confidence that had replaced his son's former need for approval. "Tell us," his father said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "Tell us about the science fair." As Alex shared the story, his mother quietly wiped tears from her eyes. The wall of expectations and traditions began to crack, letting in new possibilities of what family could mean. After several more weekends together, Alex knew he was falling in love. Not just with Dr. Rose, but with the whole idea of family she represented. The kids had started saving him a seat at their dinner table when he visited. They'd call him for help with math homework or to share exciting news about school. It felt real, it felt right, and it terrified him. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Dr. Rose invited him to stay for coffee. They sat on her small balcony, the city lights twinkling below. Her apartment wasn't fancy like his penthouse, but it felt like a real home. Children's artwork decorated the walls, family photos crowded the shelves, and somehow, even the mismatched furniture looked perfect. "I need to tell you something," Alex said, his coffee growing cold in his hands. His heart was pounding so hard, he was sure she could hear it. "Before this goes any further, you should know." "Know what?" she asked gently, seeing his struggle. He took a deep breath. "I can't have children. That's why my family rejected me, why my fiancé left. His voice cracked, "I'm infertile." The silence that followed felt endless. He couldn't look at her, couldn't bear to see the disappointment he'd seen in so many other eyes. But then he felt her hand cover his. "Look at me," she said softly. Alex slowly raised his eyes to meet hers. There was no pity there, no disappointment. Instead, he saw understanding and something that looked a lot like love. "Do you see those two sleeping kids in there?" she asked, nodding toward the bedrooms. "They're not my flesh and blood. But every scraped knee, every nightmare, every triumph, every tear, they're mine. They're my children in every way that matters." She shifted her chair closer to his. "Let me tell you a story," she said. "After my residency, I was so focused on my career that starting a biological family wasn't a priority. Then one day, a little boy came into the ER. He was scared, alone, and needed someone to trust. That boy is now sleeping in that room, calling me mom, and making my life complete. His sister came 2 years later, and my heart just grew bigger." Alex listened, barely breathing, as she continued. "Family isn't about passing on genes. It's about passing on love, values, and strength. It's about choosing each other every single day." Tears rolled down his cheeks as years of shame and pain began to lift. Dr. Rose reached out and wiped them away with her thumb. "You know what I see when I look at you?" she asked. "I see a man who makes my kids laugh, who teaches them that kindness matters more than money, who looks at them like they're precious, not because they're carrying on any legacy, but just because they're themselves." She took both his hands in hers. "Your infertility doesn't make you less of a man, less worthy of love, or less capable of being an amazing father. The fact that you've been hurting all this time but still show up with so much love to give, that makes you exactly the kind of person I want in my life." Alex couldn't speak. All the words he'd rehearsed, all the arguments he prepared about why she should run the other way, they melted away. Instead, he found himself sharing everything, his deepest fears, his secret dreams, his hope that maybe he could still have a family, just not in the way he'd originally planned. As the night grew deeper, they talked about possibilities, about how love finds its own way, about how families are built by choice as much as by chance. When he finally stood to leave, something had fundamentally shifted. The weight he'd been carrying for so long felt lighter. At the door, Dr. Rose stopped him. "Those kids in there? They've been asking when you're coming back before you even leave. That's what family feels like. And if you want it, there's room in this family for one more." Driving home that night, Alex couldn't stop smiling. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother about another family gathering he wouldn't be attending, but for the first time, it didn't hurt. He had found something better than obligation. He had found acceptance. He had found love that didn't come with conditions. Saturdays at the community center became the highlight of Alex's week. Between teaching the kids basic coding and helping with their homework, he found himself stealing glances at Dr. Rose. Her way with the children amazed him. How she could calm a crying child with just a few soft words, or encourage a shy one to join group activities. One Saturday, she invited him to join a weekend trip to the Science Museum with her kids. "They won't stop talking about their computer teacher," she said with a laugh. "Plus, we could use someone who actually understands all that tech stuff." The morning of the trip, Alex felt nervous, the kind of nervous he used to feel before big business presentations. He arrived early, bringing along some interactive coding games he'd developed. When Dr. Rose's minivan pulled up, 2 excited kids bounded out. "That's a cool car," the boy exclaimed, pointing at Alex's luxury vehicle. "But you can't fit many people in it. Come ride with us instead." His sister nodded enthusiastically, already grabbing Alex's hand to pull him toward their van. Dr. Rose watched the scene with amusement. "Looks like you've been recruited," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Unless you'd rather maintain your millionaire image." Alex found himself climbing into the minivan, surrounded by snacks, toys, and the happy chatter of children. The boy, a curious 10-year-old with a passion for science, bombarded him with questions about computers. The girl, 8 years old and artistic, showed him her sketchbook filled with colorful drawings. At the museum, Alex saw a different side of family life. Dr. Rose didn't parent like his mother had. There were no harsh words when her daughter spilled her drink, no lectures about maintaining appearances when her son got excited and spoke too loudly. Instead, there was patience, understanding, and so much laughter. The kids dragged him from exhibit to exhibit, their enthusiasm contagious. At the robotics display, Alex helped them understand how the machines worked, drawing from his tech background. Their eyes lit up with wonder, and he felt something warm bloom in his chest. During lunch in the museum cafe, The girl carefully split her cookie and offered him half. "Because sharing makes happy times twice as nice," she said, repeating what was clearly a family saying. Her brother nodded seriously, adding, "That's what Mom always tells us." Later, watching Dr. Rose help her kids conduct a simple science experiment at one of the interactive stations, Alex realized something. This was what family could look like, not a pressure to continue bloodlines, but a choice to love and support each other. Not perfect appearances, but perfect acceptance. The day turned into evening, and no one wanted it to end. They got ice cream on the way home, the kids telling stories about their school adventures. In the van, the children eventually dozed off, leaving Alex and Dr. Rose to talk quietly in the front seats. "They really like you," she said softly, glancing at her sleeping children in the rearview mirror. "They don't warm up to people easily, but with you, it's different." Alex looked back at the peaceful faces of the kids he'd spent the day with. The boy was clutching a robot keychain Alex had bought him from the gift shop. The girl had fallen asleep holding her sketchbook, where she'd drawn their whole group standing together at the museum. "I like them too," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "And their mom isn't so bad either," he added with a small smile. As they pulled up to his building, the kids stood awake just enough to give him sleepy hugs goodbye. "Come back soon," the girl mumbled, while her brother added, "Next time, you gotta teach me more about robots." Standing on the sidewalk, watching the minivan drive away, Alex felt the emptiness of his penthouse waiting above. But for the first time, it didn't feel like a prison. Instead, it felt like a space waiting to be filled with new memories, new possibilities, new kinds of love. The community center wasn't what Alex expected. Instead of the sleek, modern building he was used to, it was an old brick structure with colorful murals painted by local kids. Walking through its doors that first Saturday morning, he felt completely out of place in his designer clothes. "You must be our new volunteer," a warm voice called out. Alex turned to see a woman in a white coat approaching, her natural hair styled in neat braids, her smile genuine and welcoming. "I'm Dr. Rose," she said, extending her hand. "I run the children's medical program here." There was something about her presence that made the room feel lighter. She didn't seem impressed or intimidated by his expensive watch or the luxury car he'd parked outside, a refreshing change from the social circles he was used to. "The kids are waiting in the activity room," she continued, leading the way. "We're trying to make medical checkups less scary for them. Having someone new to talk to helps take their minds off things." The activity room was alive with energy. Children of all ages were drawing, playing board games, or reading books. A little girl with bright beads in her hair was attempting to solve a Rubik's Cube, her tongue sticking out in concentration. A boy with glasses too big for his face was building an impressive tower with wooden blocks. "These kids are amazing," Dr. Rose said softly, watching them with evident pride. "Many of them have been through more in their young lives than most adults could handle. But look at them, still smiling, still playing, still hoping." Alex spent the morning helping with various activities. He taught the Rubik's Cube girl a few solving techniques he remembered from college. He helped the boy with glasses turn his tower into a whole city. For the first time in months, he forgot about his own problems. During lunch break, he found himself sitting with Dr. Rose in the staff room, sharing sandwiches and stories. She told him about her journey, how she'd chosen pediatrics because children's resilience inspired her, how she started the medical program at the center to help kids who couldn't afford regular checkups. "What brought you here?" she asked, genuine curiosity in her eyes. "Most millionaires I know prefer writing checks to getting their hands dirty." Maybe it was her direct manner, or maybe he was just tired of carrying his secret alone, but Alex found himself telling her everything. About his family's rejection, about Lynn leaving, about the emptiness of success without connection. He expected to see pity in her eyes. Instead, he saw understanding and something else, respect. "You know," she said, "family isn't always about who shares your DNA. Sometimes it's about who sees your worth beyond what you can or can't give them." She told him about her own life, how she'd chosen to adopt 2 children after realizing she wanted to be a mother but didn't want to put her career on hold for pregnancy. "My kids aren't biologically mine," she said, "but they're mine in every way that matters." The afternoon flew by. They talked about everything, their favorite books, their childhood dreams, their biggest fears. She made him laugh for the first time in months with stories about her kids' adventures. He found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone, not even Lynn. As the day wound down and volunteers started leaving, Alex lingered, helping Dr. Rose organize medical supplies. Their conversations flowed effortlessly, punctuated by comfortable silences. When their hands accidentally touched while reaching for the same box of bandages, he felt a spark he thought he'd never feel again. Walking to his car that evening, Alex realized something had shifted inside him. The community center, with its worn floors and bright murals, felt more like home than his luxury penthouse ever had. And Dr. Rose, with her straightforward manner and compassionate heart, had shown him a different kind of strength, one that had nothing to do with money or family names. For the first time since his diagnosis, he felt hope, not the desperate kind that had made him seek multiple medical opinions, but a quiet, steady hope that maybe there was more than one way to build a family, more than one way to leave a legacy. The next few months passed in a blur of empty days and sleepless nights. Alex's $50 million company continued to thrive, but he felt like a ghost walking through his own life. His executive assistant noticed how he started scheduling back-to-back meetings, filling every minute of his day to avoid the silence that waited at home. His penthouse, once featured in architecture magazines for its stunning minimalist design, became a reflection of his inner state. Takeout containers piled up on the kitchen counter. Unopened mail scattered across the coffee table. The guest room where his mother used to stay during her visits remained locked, collecting dust. The whispers at family gatherings had turned into complete silence. His cousins blocked him on social media. Wedding invitations stopped arriving. His childhood photos disappeared from the family home. It was as if they were trying to erase any trace of the son who had failed them. One particularly dark evening, as Alex scrolled through old family photos on his phone, he came across a video from last year's Lunar New Year celebration. His mother was teaching Lynn, his ex-fiancée, their secret family recipe for dumplings. They were laughing, flour dusting their clothes, his mother already calling Lynn daughter. The sight made his stomach twist. Lynn had moved on quickly. Through mutual friends, he heard she was already engaged to someone else, a distant relative of his family, ironically. Someone who could give her what he couldn't. The engagement announcement in the local Chinese newspaper mentioned how the new couple looked forward to continuing both family legacies. Work became his escape. He threw himself into expanding his tech company, launching new projects, and acquiring smaller startups. His wealth grew, but the zeros in his bank account felt meaningless. What good was success if you had no one to share it with? His executive assistant, worried about his declining mental health, secretly signed him up for a local community center's mentoring program. "You need something outside these office walls," she said, sliding the registration form across his desk. "Something real." At first, Alex ignored it. But one Saturday morning, staring at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, dark circles under his eyes, 3-day stubble on his chin, he realized he barely recognized himself anymore. The ambitious, optimistic man who used to light up rooms with his energy had become a shadow. That same morning, his mother called, the first time in months. His heart leaped, hoping for reconciliation. Instead, she called to inform him that his childhood home was being sold. "Your father and I are moving closer to your cousin's new house," she said flatly, "to be near our future grandchildren." After hanging up, Alex stood in his kitchen, hands shaking as he tried to make coffee. The expensive coffee maker, a housewarming gift from his parents, suddenly felt like it was mocking him. In a burst of emotion, he unplugged it and shoved it into a cabinet. Looking around his empty penthouse, with its perfect view of a city that never slept, Alex felt more alone than ever. The registration form for the community center still sat on his desk, brought home in a moment of weakness. Maybe it was time to stop hiding in his work. Maybe it was time to find out who he could be without the weight of his family's expectations. Little did he know, as he finally filled out that form, that he was taking the first step toward a different kind of family, one built on choice rather than obligation, on love rather than duty. Sometimes, he would later realize, having everything fall apart is just life's way of clearing space for something better to take root. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the doctor's office as Alex sat nervously, his fingers tapping against the armrest. At 35, he had everything most people dreamed of, a successful tech company worth millions, a beautiful penthouse in the heart of the city, and a family name that opened doors in both American and Asian business circles. But today, all of that seemed meaningless as he waited for the test results. "I'm afraid the results aren't what we hoped for," Dr. Thompson said gently, sliding the medical report across his desk. Alex's heart sank as he scanned the papers, the medical terms blurring before his eyes, but one word stood out clearly: infertile. His mother's voice echoed in his head, her constant reminders about carrying on the family name, about giving her grandchildren to spoil. Just last week at the family dinner, she had proudly announced to everyone how her son would soon provide her with beautiful grandchildren. The weight of those expectations now felt like a boulder on his chest. Walking out of the medical building, Alex loosened his tie, struggling to breathe. He called his mother, knowing he had to tell her. The phone conversation that followed would change his life forever. His mother's initial silence was worse than any screaming could have been. "What do you mean, you can't have children?" Her voice finally cracked. "There must be a mistake. We'll get another opinion. Your father and I didn't work this hard, didn't build everything from nothing in this country for our only son to end our family line." But there wasn't a mistake. 3 more doctors confirmed what the first had said. With each confirmation, his relationship with his family grew more strained. His mother stopped calling daily, their usual morning chats replaced by deafening silence. His father's proud introductions at business events became awkward encounters where Alex was barely acknowledged. The final blow came at the next family gathering. Alex arrived to find his cousin seated in his usual place at the table, being praised for his recent marriage and expectations of a baby. His own seat was at the far end, next to distant relatives he barely knew. His mother couldn't even look him in the eye when she served the food. That night, as he drove home alone, rain pounding against his car windows, Alex made a decision. He pulled over and finally let himself cry, not for the children he couldn't have, but for the conditional love that had been stripped away so easily. His phone buzzed with a message from Lynn, his fiancée of 2 years. Even before reading it, he knew what it would say. "I'm sorry," the message began, "but I can't spend my life with someone who can't give me children. My parents, they say it's best if we end things now. I've already moved my things out." Sitting in his car, watching the city lights blur through his tears, Alex realized that his worth to everyone he loved had been tied to something he couldn't control. The millions in his bank account, the successful company he'd built from scratch, his kindness, his achievements, none of it mattered without the ability to continue the family line. He drove home to his empty penthouse, its pristine luxury now feeling more like a museum than a home. Standing at his floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the glittering city below, Alex made another decision. If his so-called family could discard him so easily, he would build something new, something real, something based on love rather than obligation. Little did he know, across the city, someone else was awake too, looking at those same city lights, wondering if real love existed in this world. Someone who would soon show him that family isn't about blood, it's about heart.